I know I shouldn't be biased whenever I talk about content on the channel, right? I should say, this is a great one. And this is, I love this topic today so much. I can't even come up with an example of how to not treat this like one of my favorite things to talk about. And the reason is I get so many questions. I've created tons of videos about repurposing content, batching content, how to have a great content strategy. But at the end of the day, when people ask me or they come to me and they say, Crystal, I am overwhelmed and creating content and putting it on social media and on my podcast and on my YouTube and talking about it on my email list, like it just feels so overwhelming. Today's video has the solution to your problems. Yes, we are talking about using just one theme for your entire weekly content. So let's get right to it. Hey y'all, Crystal here today, and we are talking about how to make your content strategy and your content creation that much easier. Yes, we're all about creating content with confidence around here. And I think that oftentimes when people ask me about repurposing or batching and they start to feel overwhelmed, the clear thing that I can recommend for people to do is to scrap all the fancy, let me do this and reuse this here and let me do that here. It's just coming up with a theme for your content. So this could happen at the very beginning stages, right? Before you ever create anything, you could say, okay, instead of stressing myself out because I talked about this on my podcast and I talked about this on my YouTube and then I need to talk about this in my email, you take a step back before you create any of these things across all your platform and you say, how can I tie all of these pieces together? How can you have one overarching theme that feels like all of your platforms are tied together? So if someone finds you on LinkedIn and then they see a post there, but then they go to your Instagram, but then they see something on your blog, and then they find you on your podcast or on your YouTube all in the same week, you're talking about relatively the same thing. It doesn't have to be the exact same piece of content, but you can see at a high level the through line of how everything is tied together. That's what we're talking about today. And don't worry, of course, I have examples. I'm going to show you this in real time of what this looks like in my own content. But I want to give you two really important things to remember as you are deciding on, well, how do I know which theme to pick and what does that actually look like? The first step, number one, is deciding on your theme. Is it going to be an overarching big picture idea that you're going to be covering in all of your content? So a great example of this is marketing. Y'all know I love to talk about marketing, whether it's email marketing, podcast marketing, YouTube marketing, tying all the different pieces together. I love to talk about marketing. But marketing is a pretty broad topic, right? I just covered all the different ways I could talk about marketing. So if I am looking at my content calendar and I say, well, how will I tie my podcast about marketing to a YouTube video about marketing and then also talk about that on my Friday email to my list? I want everything to feel organic, but I don't just want to copy and paste and put everything all across all the different places because people might get frustrated with that, or they may say, gosh, Crystal's lazy over there, just copying and pasting everything. Like, can't you come up with an original idea? I know, I've heard it. And y'all, I am the worst at judging my own content. So there's nothing someone else can say about my content that I haven't already thought of myself. Okay, let's just throw that out there. But I just want to make it clear that the first thing you have to do is just decide, what is that theme going to be? And this is going to look different for everybody's content. So I'm really talking to those creators that have multiple platforms that you want to tie together where everything feels cohesive, because at the end of the day, that is a very, very important branding piece for your content. If you want to know more about marketing and branding in general, then make sure you tell me in the comments below, because that's something we haven't covered in depth, in detail here on this channel, but it's something I'm always willing to explore because I'm such a nerd about branding and marketing. But that is number one, deciding what is it going to look like if you use an overarching theme. The next option that is under the umbrella of deciding on a theme is saying, okay, well, I take this idea and apply it to my podcast, right? I'm going to have a 30-minute podcast episode where I talk about this one specific topic, but then I'm going to take one little chunk out of that and use it for my YouTube, right? Like people on YouTube don't want to see a 45-minute audio recording or a video recording of me speaking just into my microphone. Y'all, I see these go wrong all the time when people talk about video podcast and it's just them in their office. There's no multi-camera, like a whole dynamic piece of production. It's just them talking into their microphone like this. They're not even looking at the camera. They're just talking like this. And it's like, that's not compelling. I don't want to watch that. So how can you take something where you are talking just in your microphone and maybe it's a little boring to watch and turn it into a dynamic piece of content that can live on your YouTube channel and use it the way the platform was created to really showcase your content and make it shine. People on YouTube, like the YouTube creators, want you to succeed, but you got to play by their game and you have to create content that is specific for the platform in order for it to perform the way the platform was meant to perform. So you could take the podcast episode, take one idea from it and say, you know what? People really search for this all the time on YouTube or Google. So I'm going to create a video about that. And you would know how to do this if you check out our videos all about SEO and content creation. I'm going to link to those below in the video description. But I think it's really important. And I'm going to have an example of exactly what this looks like. But before we get there, I want to go into step number 2. Because step number 2 is all about the idea of repurposing, right? We talked about this at the beginning. Whenever people come to me asking about repurposing and batching, they're like, well, how can I do this? This feels so hard. How can I actually make this work? And I say, well, why don't you apply a weekly theme? And they say, well, Crystal, what does that actually look like? How can I make this work? Well, step one, we decided on our theme. So the second thing you have to decide is, are you going to repurpose something where maybe you are recording yourself and you're really animated and you know how to be in front of the camera and you're like, okay, I know if I can make this work on YouTube, I can strip the audio from this, use it in my podcast, and it can definitely transition between the two, right? Like it could be a chameleon and adjust to and adapt to whatever platform that it's published on. Y'all, this is very few and far between creators that can actually make this happen, and it's a seamless process. Usually it's people that have an entire team behind them that make them look fancy and shiny and polished and amazing, and they just look so seamless. It's because there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. I know this from talking to so many different creators. That's typically what is happening. So what I recommend is doing exactly what we talked about. So we decide on a theme, then I recommend going deep on that one topic for your podcast. Tell the stories, tell the anecdotes, share the strategies, go in depth on all the behind the scenes things that you want to share with your audience. But on YouTube, make it actionable. So on the podcast, you talked about the 5 ways to market your podcast on social media. How about on YouTube, you say the best way to market your podcast on social media, and you just go really deep on that one. Or, and this is where we're like adding layers onto this. I know, I get it. Just stick with me here, because you could take the long form podcast episode and turn it into 5 shorter videos. So the one podcast episode has all 5 strategies, but on YouTube, you could break it down into 5 shorter videos that you could publish over a while. So not only do you have this content that you've already created, you created the outline for it, you already did the show notes, you have all the information. You did your dry run on the podcast. So you're ready to create this YouTube content over here, right? So you could turn it into a series that spans over multiple weeks, not just one weekly theme. Like now we're stretching into a monthly theme of content. I mean, like, I hope I'm just like not blowing your mind and giving you all of the ideas. I kind of hope I am, because that's just what it makes my heart so happy when somebody will DM me and they're just like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about this strategy. My mind is exploding with so many different ideas. I mean, that's my whole goal here to do. But you have to make the decision how you're going to use that content. And another thing that I'm thinking about now that all of the ideas are flowing is once I've created a transcript for my podcast, this is actually part of my process. You can watch this video right here on how I do all the things that have to do with show notes for my podcast, because I will transcribe the episode. And then I think that it would actually be a really cool thing for someone that's just baby stepping into using a theme or repurposing your content. You could say, okay, I have this transcript. What quotes can I pull from this to post on social media? This is how you get the theme going, right? You can use your transcripts for quotes for social media. You could use it to quote yourself in an email. I've done this before too. Or I quote my guest and I say, oh my gosh, this awesome nugget was shared on the podcast. Make sure you go listen to the rest of it. So there's the through line. I created it on a podcast. I transcribed it. So it's also in my show notes, which, if you didn't know this, is a blog post. And then I'm posting about it on social media as well as sharing about it on my emails. This is how you create that through line that feels organic, where someone, if they find you, no matter which platform they find you on, they're like, oh, she's talking about the same thing. Not she's over here talking about apples and I'm looking for oranges and I go to her website and I find bananas. I don't know. I'm hungry at this point recording this video. So that's just what's on my mind. But you get it, right? You get it. You want it to feel organic and natural as someone flows through every element of your brand. So again, if you have questions about branding and marketing whenever it comes to keeping everything cohesive on your platform, make sure and tell me in the comments, because this is something that I think would be a really fun topic to cover. Last thing I want to say, I wanted to give you an actual example of what this looks like in my content. So we're going to go to the computer and I'm going to show you some real-time examples of how I have used this in my content. Okay, so I'm taking a shortcut today because I recently created a podcast episode just about this exact same thing that we're talking about here today. And so I wanted to show you, I know it's like such a meta inside a meta concept because we're talking about weekly themes while I'm also showing you exactly how I created a weekly theme around the content I'm creating. And then I'm going to show you an example of how I've done this in the past. I know it's a whole thing. It's like an inception thing that we have going here. Just bear with me for a second. But episode 352 of the Proffitt Podcast, go listen to it if you do want the whole scoop. You want the whole shebang of why this is important and how you can just learn a little bit more behind the scenes. But for the visual component of what this looks like, you can go to crystalproffitt.com/episode 352. That is the content strategy, use one weekly theme podcast episode. I'm going to link to it in the video description, but you can scroll down to see, hey, this is a blog post and I've already created a podcast episode. I just told you about it. I'm creating this YouTube video. Okay, we're here right now. We're in it. This is a blog post that lives on my website, and you can bet your bottom dollar I'm going to share this in my Friday email and talk about this video and this podcast episode and link to the blog post. So you see what I'm saying? Like, this is a whole weekly theme inside of itself. But for good measure, I did include an example here in the show notes. So we talked about deciding on one theme, very important. We talked about repurposing content or what that looks like if you're going to connect all the different platforms together. But I actually shared with you here the different examples of how I've done this in the past. So this is a podcast episode. I actually embedded the audio here. This is a YouTube video that is very much like a clip of this. So you can talk about the repurposing strategy. This is a 26-minute podcast episode. I think that this video is around 6 or 7 minutes long. So I took some of the content from the podcast, I shared it on YouTube, then I posted a soundbite from the podcast episode where there's actually not a video component, it's just a soundbite, audiogram. And then the second post on Instagram was a video clip from the actual video that I turned into a reel that I posted on Instagram. And then I linked to all of this in my Friday email. Yeah, you can actually click on that link and ConvertKit will take you to the real email that I sent to my list so that you can have an example. But I really wanted to show you today what this can look like as you apply this to your own content, and just to show you it's very doable to use a weekly theme just to make your life that much easier. Well, I hope you found today's video super helpful because I want you to be able to create content with confidence. It is literally our mission around here to help content creators just like you feel more confident whenever you're putting your stuff out into the world. So make sure, if you have not already, to hit the thumbs up on this video and subscribe below. That way you're notified every time we put out brand new videos that are filled with content tips, strategies, resources, and all the things. Check out these other videos right here. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.